Chapter 8, Inner Strength. In my early teen years, I told a friend and cousin about my dad's abuse. They didn't know what to do either. Their responses were, "My neighbor does that to me too. I hate it. And that sucks. I'm sorry." We were kids. Nobody had ever told us how to get help when our friends and family members were hurting us. I couldn't tell the police and expect them to help me. For all I knew, the elders had spoken to law enforcement for the past few years. The police must have more important things to work on, and my case just isn't severe enough. I prayed constantly for God to make my dad stop or to put me with another family, but that didn't happen. I wanted him dead. Although God didn't kill my dad for me, I do believe he put a shield around my mind and my heart to protect me. Deep down, I knew someday I was going to beat him. I knew I was better than this. I knew this would not destroy me. I was far more mature and intellectually sound than most of my peers who had none of this to worry about. There was a strength in me that no one knew I had and no one could break. At a Jehovah's Witness meeting one day, Dad put his arm around my shoulders. I shrugged so he would move his arm, but he grabbed my shoulder tight, leaned into me, and whispered in my ear, "It's normal for fathers to put their arms around their daughters." "I don't care," I said. "Move your arm." He wouldn't move. In that moment, I made a decision. I'm going to fight for me, and I will not take his abuse so easily anymore. On the inside, I was filled with hate, rage, and anger. No more no more sharing showers or a bed. No more modeling lingerie. No more allowing him to touch me without making a scene. No more. I became more vocal about how much I hated my dad and would yell at him to leave me alone. He would cry like a baby and beg me to forgive him. I always did. I loved him because he was my dad. I still saw him as the playful parent he'd been until my mom left. Aside from molesting me, he was great. I kept waiting for that dad to come back. Even with my loud objection to the abuse, his behavior continued. As I grew more defiant, my dad grew more crafty. After every fight, he'd take it up a notch and go to more extreme measures to get his way. Because I had severe allergies, Dad regularly gave me allergy pills that made me drowsy. He would wait for me to fall asleep before carrying me into his room to have his way with me. God protected me. I never woke up during the night. In the morning, I'd be wearing different clothes, and I knew something had happened, but I was relieved I couldn't remember. It was so much better than lying there silently freaking out inside while he was touching me. It seemed I had found the off switch to the pain, but it came with a price. My inability to feel, which protected me from my father's constant abuse, also prevented me from connecting with others in an authentic way. Sure, I could say all the right things to my friends or offer advice to someone going through a tough time, but I felt dead inside. I couldn't feel. I couldn't cry. I couldn't be vulnerable. My heart was as hard as stone. I knew this wasn't normal, so I compensated by turning to humor. To prevent conversations from heading in an emotional direction, I would be the funny one in the room. I had no idea who I was, but I was a master at lying to myself and everyone else. When I was 14, my dad's regular drinking became so excessive that he would go to social gatherings and get too drunk to drive. He started letting me drive his truck to take him home. After a few times of bailing him out when he was too drunk to drive, he started letting me drive everywhere, even to the Kingdom Hall. One time, a congregation elder saw me driving into the parking lot and lectured my dad about not letting me drive. Dad let me drive home immediately after that meeting. I got to do a lot of things other teens weren't allowed to do because of our sick relationship. I could get away with anything. I just couldn't get away from him. As I got older, my dad bothered me more and more without much concern about who saw. He would pat me on the butt when I walked by. Once Brandon saw and I felt humiliated. Dad would regularly make sexualized comments about my body and tell me how gorgeous I was. When he drove us to the Kingdom Hall to one of his many parties or back home, he'd adjust the rearview mirror so I pointed to my crotch. One time, I knocked on his bedroom door to tell him I was hungry. He told me to come in, and when I opened the door, he was sitting on the side of the bed masturbating to a porn magazine. His inappropriate behavior was constant. Dad's obsession with me was getting out of control. He was growing increasingly persistent about marrying me. His ideas confused me, to say the least. How was I your daughter for 14 years and suddenly I'm your ideal wife? He was dead set on finding a place in Utah where we could go live and get married. In my head, I was thinking, this guy is completely crazy. But I just shut off like I always did and remained quiet. I think he knew I was too embarrassed to have a real conversation about our situation, so he didn't ask me to agree or disagree. He just confidently laid out his sick plans for me. Deep down, I was afraid he might kidnap me and make me marry him. Why would my dad want to marry me? Did God curse me with a beauty not even my dad can resist? I thought there must be something wrong with me that made my dad's obsession so relentless. One weekend when I was 15, I walked into my room and found 3 new bathing suits from Nordstrom's lying on my bed. I was elated. I rushed to try them on before heading down to the pool. But when I got undressed and started putting the first bathing suit over my head, I got a horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. I walked over to my closet and slid the door open. My dad was sitting on the floor watching me. I was pissed. "Get the F out of my room," I yelled. He jumped up and tried to get me to lower my voice, begging me to be quiet so my brother wouldn't hear me. With my dad out of the room, I tried on all the bathing suits and picked out my favorite one. In my new suit that had a cute ladybug design, I headed down to the pool. My dad watched me with a disgusting stare the whole time I was swimming. He commented on what a great body I had. I felt so ugly and gross. Things were getting worse and I felt pressure to do something about it, but I was terrified that everyone would know my nightmare. I could not bear the thought of being looked at as different, dirty, or disgusting. I already wore enough shame while it was a secret. The thought of others knowing was so humiliating to me, I didn't think I would be able to live through it. My dad tried to keep me away from other boys and men. He didn't let me play alone with any boys in the neighborhood. Boys will only want one thing from you: sex. Dad had been saying stuff like that since I was 13, but I always believed that he was lying to me. I thought he was sick for thinking every guy wanted to sleep with me. He just wants me for himself, so he's keeping me inside to avoid any competition. I didn't trust anything he said. By the time I was a teenager, I thought sex with the boy I chose might be nice, as opposed to being forced by my own dad. A rebellion in me was growing stronger by the day, but I was still too scared to do anything about it. I had all these sexual feelings and strong emotions that I didn't know what to do with. I felt like I was going crazy. Beginning in the summer leading up to my freshman year of high school, I started getting a lot of piercings to distract myself. Mom always took me and paid for them. "You can have as many piercings as you like, but no tattoos," she said. "Holes close up, but tattoos don't come off." I eventually had 5 holes in both of my ears, as well as a nose and tongue piercing. The pain was a rush. I wanted to hurt just so I could feel something. My dad hated my piercings, which made me love them even more. Now, when my perfect dad took his daughter covered in piercings to Jehovah's Witness meetings, everyone knew something wasn't right. Piercings were simply not tolerated in that religion. According to the Watchtower Society at that time, only 1 piercing was allowed for women. As far as I was concerned, I was simply expressing on the outside the damage and holes I had on the inside. The elders knew what was happening to me. My rebellion shouldn't have been surprising to them. Did they really think ignoring me was going to make me go away? Did they think I would go out quietly? I'm sure they were hoping so. Eventually, I came to realize the elders were choosing not to help me. My dad tried harder and harder to get me to feel bad for him, and he began confessing to the Jehovah's Witness elders more often. He would turn on the waterworks and beg me to forgive him. He'd promise he would never touch me again. Then he'd tell me not to let him touch me, as if I wanted, as if what I wanted had ever been respected in the past. "I can touch you here and here, but don't let me touch you anywhere else," he'd say. It was my job to enforce his new boundaries. During each of these conversations, he promised me that the elders were going to help him this time. After years of the same cycle, the elders finally wrote to the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society to ask what to do about my dad. I waited with anticipation for that letter to come. It should be here any day. I couldn't wait for the Jehovah's Witness headquarters to help me. When I was 15, the letter finally came and I met with the elders for the last time. My excitement and hope were quickly snuffed out when the letter basically said, "The abuse is happening in your congregation, so you can deal with it at a local level, however you see fit." My heart sank. Nobody was going to help me. The elders decided to publicly reprove my dad for sexually abusing me, basically giving him a slap on the wrist. When someone is publicly reproved, an announcement is made from the stage that so-and-so is publicly reproved. The elders usually give a talk to the congregation afterward to highlight the specific sin that person was involved in to prevent others from falling into the same sin. I was horrified that the elders would announce what he was doing to me. When the day came, I was relieved to hear them address my dad's sexual sin in a general sense. They focused on pornography and didn't even allude to incest. For 6 months, Dad wouldn't be allowed to answer questions during the services, but they would not disfellowship him. When a person is disfellowshipped, or today they say no longer a Jehovah's Witness, they are essentially shunned from the Jehovah's Witness community, and any Jehovah's Witnesses who speak to them will also be disfellowshipped. My mom was already disfellowshipped for having an affair. The elders felt that for the spiritual well-being of me and my brother, my dad still needed to be able to associate with other Jehovah's Witnesses. Instead of offering to call the police or my mom and help me escape my never-ending nightmare, 2 of the elders offered to let me sleep on their couch on weekend nights. Do they really believe I'm only abused at night? This was the most awkward arrangement. The elders' wives were not initially privy to the reason I was staying at their house, but I can imagine they put 2 and 2 together. My dad would drop me off late at night, and there I'd find a couch made into a bed where I would lay awake, wondering how this became my life. How did I get here? What am I going to do? How did I become so helpless? We never talked about this arrangement as a family. I have no idea what my brother thought I was up to. In the morning, Dad would pick me up from the elders' house. I couldn't help but wonder how my dad felt knowing I was safer in a stranger's home than in the house of my own father. On Tuesday night, I walked into the Kingdom Hall and saw one of the elders' wives who often made a bed for me. In front of her 3 friends, she asked, "Amanda, where did you sleep last weekend?" My brain shut off. I was paralyzed in humiliation. Why was she asking me that in front of other people? My mind ran wild with who may know and what they were thinking about me. I was now paranoid, and the embarrassment was so great that I stopped going to meetings. Neither my dad nor my grandparents could force me to go anymore. I'd had enough. I was done. Chapter 9, License to Drive. In the summer before my sophomore year of high school, Mom and Rick had a house built down the street from Interlake High School in Redmond. Throughout my freshman year, I had gotten up at 5 a.m. and taken 3 city buses to get to Bellevue High School. I was so excited to transfer and look forward to sleeping in, meeting new teachers, and making new friends. And that's exactly what I did. Early into my sophomore year, I was popular at my new school and had plenty of new friends. 4 days before I turned 16, Rick bought me a 1989 Toyota Corolla in my favorite color, red. It wasn't the Volkswagen GTI I had always dreamed of, but I loved this car so much, especially that it was mine. I felt so proud driving that beautiful car. I got my driver's license 3 days after my 16th birthday. After driving illegally for years, it felt good to finally drive without worrying about getting caught. Rick got me a hostess job at a Chinese restaurant, which got me out of the house for a few hours on weekend evenings. Dad didn't like that at all, but he was always happy to let me pay his utility bills with my earnings since he couldn't afford them. I spent the year after I turned 16 practically homeless on weekends. I started dropping Brandon off at my dad's house while I went out and partied the entire weekend. When the party died down, I'd sleep on the couch of whichever friend would have me that weekend. If I didn't have a friend to stay with, I would sleep in my car. As much as I would have loved to go home to my mom's house on a weekend, I knew it would be suspicious. I rarely stayed at my dad's house, but when I did, I locked myself in my room and refused to eat or come out for anything. Sometimes I would wake up and find my dad lying on the ground next to my bed. I'd order him to get out. He just wouldn't leave me alone. In my constant partying, I developed a taste for alcohol and tried occasionally smoking weed. When I was high, I found myself thinking too much and getting paranoid. I quickly stopped smoking pot, but I loved drinking. I was the life of every party and was always by far the wildest one there. I'd break things and yell. I had nothing more to lose, which made me dangerously reckless. If I was offered an opportunity to do anything crazy, as long as it wasn't hardcore drugs, I would do it. The very first day I drove myself to school, the police and principal immediately had my car searched. It was brand new and I didn't even have a piece of trash for them to find, but clearly I had a reputation. For a long time, I didn't trust boys as lovers. I befriended them instead. I didn't wear makeup and tried to be one of the boys. After hearing how the guys talked about girls they were interested in, I made sure I was like a sister to them. I felt safe knowing they would protect me instead of trying to get with me. Having a car and a part-time job gave me a lot of freedom. I was finding myself and having fun. Even though I was shy, I loved the attention I was getting from cute boys. At 16, I accepted a bet to win a guy over and make him dump his 3 other girlfriends to go out with me. And the next thing I knew, I was in a serious relationship. My mother trusted me and allowed me to take my car out until 2 a.m. When a boy came to my house, Mom would send him downstairs to my bedroom and never ask questions. My mom never told me not to have sex. I felt she expected me to. She told me she was too young to be a grandma and said, "I'm sure you're smart enough to be on birth control." I wasn't, but after that comment I started on birth control. Rick told me he hoped I didn't lose my virginity in the back of a car. Mom chimed in that I was good enough for a kitchen floor or countertop. That hurt. Chapter 10, Busted. My love for alcohol started to go beyond parties with my friends. It was my everyday escape. I regularly stole my parents' alcohol and got drunk in my room. Each week I paid a senior with a fake ID to buy me vodka. I came to school with a full water bottle every day, but it never had water in it. Most days I was drunk from the start of my first class until the end of the school day. One night my friends invited me to go out drinking. I drank alone in my room until everyone in my house went to bed, and then I walked right out the front door. I ran to my girlfriend's car and off we went to drink the night away. When I got home, my stepdad greeted me at the front door with a breathalyzer. "Blow into it," Mom yelled at me. I was busted. I felt horrible for letting my mom down. She had trusted me so much, and I had broken pretty much the only rule she had. I don't remember what my blood alcohol level was, but if they gave blood alcohol levels in plain words, this would have said drunk. Apparently, when I walked out the front door, Rick had been lying on the couch in our formal living room. In the dark, I hadn't seen him, but he had watched me leave and waited patiently for me to come back. I went downstairs to sleep off my night of drinking, and the next morning, my mom and stepdad acted as if nothing happened. Wow, I got away with it. I thought my parents had miraculously moved on from me sneaking out and coming home drunk. A couple of days later, Mom told me, "I thought of the perfect punishment for you." "What is it?" I asked. "You have to go to your dad's this weekend without your brother and without your car. Your dad will pick you up from school Friday afternoon and drop you off Sunday night at 9. I almost passed out. There is no way I can handle that. This was my dad's sick dream and hell on earth for me. She didn't know what she was doing to me. The day went on and I stayed downstairs in my room listening to music, knowing I had to do something. I could not go to my dad's house under those circumstances. Around 6 p.m. when it was dark outside, I finally made my way upstairs to talk to my mom. She had her jacket and her shoes on, so I asked, "Where are you going?" "To the grocery store." "Can I leave the boys with you?" Mom asked. "Yeah, that's fine," I agreed. I sat down in a rocking chair and watched her walk out of sight. "Mom," I called out. She came back in. "Yes?" "When you get back, I have something I have to tell you." "I'll be in my room," I told her. My voice was shaking. "You can tell me now," she offered. "No, just come find me when you get back." Okay, she agreed and headed to the store. As I waited for Mom to return, my mind went crazy. I wondered what she was going to say. Would she believe me? Would she try to kill him? Would she not let me babysit my brothers anymore out of fear I might be like him? Is she going to think something is wrong with me too? When I heard the garage door open, I left my young brothers upstairs and headed to the basement. I waited on my futon for her to come talk to me. My eyes desperately scanned the room, catching the pristine vacuum lines and string lights. I was so nervous. I was scared she'd forget about me. Part of me wished she wouldn't come. The other part knew she had to. It felt as if my heart was going to explode. I wanted to throw up. This is a problem for my whole family now. It's not just me with the crushing weight of the world. Now everyone else will feel it too. I almost felt like I was in trouble. It seemed as if only seconds had passed before she was outside my door. There's no way she had time to unload her bags of groceries. The gold knob started to turn. This was it. I had to tell her. She stood looking at me. I somehow got out the words, "You know what happened to Dad when he was little? Well, he's been doing that to me." Her eyes got big. A single tear ran down her cheek. Without saying a word, she turned around, opened my door, and walked out. I sat there and cried. Once again, I was so confused. Why did she leave? Why didn't she say anything? Why didn't she hug me? What's wrong with me? A month went by and Mom hadn't said anything about what I had told her. Instead of making me spend the weekend at my dad's as punishment for the drinking incident, my parents punished me by selling my beloved car. I was crushed. One day, people with briefcases walked into my bedroom. I couldn't tell you if they were men or women. I was just stunned that they were there without any warning. They started asking questions about my dad's behavior. I was so shocked and scared that my brain shut down and I barely remember my interview with him, only that it happened. That's how I learned my mom had called Child Protective Services. They reassured me I didn't have to go to my dad's again, and my brother wasn't allowed to see him either. Brandon was devastated, and I felt responsible. I thought, if I had just spent that weekend with Dad, maybe Brandon could have been older when he found out. Maybe he wouldn't have to only be 14 when he lost his dad. While the prosecutors built their case, my dad was not in custody and he started stalking me. I was still working as a hostess, but now at a restaurant called the Yankee Diner. During a shift one night, I noticed my dad sitting in his car. He'd backed into a parking spot so he could see right into the restaurant. "Come get me if I'm not back in 5 minutes," I told my coworker as I walked out to meet my dad. "Have a seat in my car," Dad urged me. Reluctantly, I complied. "Did you talk to the police?" he asked. I froze and denied everything. "I haven't said a word," I lied. He began trash talking Mom, so I wrapped up the conversation as quickly as possible and went back to work. In his mind, he was still the better person and parent. I started receiving mail from the prosecutor with court dates and information they needed from me. Mom would hand me the mail unopened. One day I broke down sobbing in my room when Mom called me upstairs to eat dinner. I came upstairs to get my plate and Mom could see I had been crying. "Why are you crying?" she asked in a very irritated tone. I didn't say anything. I had hit a new low. I felt destroyed, unloved, and completely alone. During the investigation, I had a meeting at the police station in Bellevue in the middle of a school day. Instead of getting a ride to school from a friend that morning, Mom had me drive her minivan with a note to get out of class early so I could take myself to the appointment. As I pulled into the police station, I was overcome with anger toward my mom for not going with me to this meeting. An older man met me in the small room and we talked for a bit. I was terrified he might try to rape me. If something happened, there would be no one around to hear me scream. The detective never touched me. After the interview, he drove me to Seattle so I could answer the prosecutor's questions and help build a case against my dad. I hated being in that ugly green Ford Taurus with some man I just met. I wanted to die. I'd reached a place in life where life was happening all around me and I was expected to keep going. I had schoolwork to do, friends to see, and little brothers to babysit. But I wanted to lay down and die. People kept dragging me along, forcing me to do normal things. I was going through the motions, but I was no longer playing dead. I was actually dead inside. My spirit was broken. I cannot believe I'm in this ugly Ford Taurus with this fat white guy who I didn't even know 10 minutes ago, driving to go talk to a legal person about my shitty father. Is this really my life? How did this happen to me? The prosecutor asked me a few questions and wanted to know what I thought my dad would do when confronted with my accusations. Dad had always been forthright with the Jehovah's Witnesses elders about abusing me. I was confident he would admit everything without putting up a fight. The prosecutor almost chuckled. He would be the first. He told me that it was highly unlikely my dad would admit everything. I figured my dad must be used to admitting what he'd done and wouldn't hide it now. Then the prosecutor asked me, "What would you like to see happen to your dad?" I was hopeful he could be fixed. "I just want him to go to intense counseling," I replied. "No jail time." I wanted my dad back. I missed him. I didn't recognize the monster he had become. If these same men who are finally helping me can just fix my dad and send him back to me when he's better, we can all move on and get back to normal. That, of course, did not happen. At some point during the investigation, Mom called the King County prosecutor and asked a valid question. "She can't be the only one. Can't we do a class action case to include all the other sexual abuse crimes these Kingdom Halls must have covered up?" The prosecutor told her, "For Amanda's sake, just go after her father. It will take years to uncover everything the Jehovah's Witnesses are hiding." To this day, I'm convinced there must be countless other children who have been abused and who are currently being abused by a religion whose headquarters refused to report these crimes to the authorities and instead taught their congregation to report to the elders. The Watchtower Society has since changed their stance on reporting, but the fact that they needed to be told how to handle sexual abuse cases is evidence of a problem. I'm disappointed the police department wasn't willing to file more paperwork or dig any deeper into a culture of crime within an organization that cared more about appearances to the outside world than protecting the people they claimed to love. Shortly after my parents sold my new red car, I inherited my Aunt Jackie's old Subaru. I hated that car. But Mom and Rick needed me driving so I could run errands and take care of their kids. It wasn't ideal, but at least I could drive again. At 16, I was tired of Rick harassing me about eating his food that I hadn't asked permission to eat and having him breathe down my neck about every little thing I did. So I called my grandpa, Jay. Jay immediately came to pick me up and saw that I was ready to go with just my backpack and some clothes and my CD player. "That's not enough stuff," Jay said calmly. We packed up my whole room and he took me to live with him and Ellen. The next day, I came back to grab a couple more things that hadn't fit in Jay's car the night before. Mom cried and for the first time said, "I'm sorry. I love you." Her husband worked for her life, but not mine. I lived with Jay and Ellen for most of the remainder of my high school years, only occasionally staying at my mom's. Chapter 11, Court. My senior year of high school started, and while I was 17, making more friends, still dating my boyfriend, and loving my school, I also had a looming court date coming up. My dad's hearing and sentencing would be any day now. On the day of the court hearing, Mom's minivan pulled up to pick me up from school early. As I approached the van, I hoped to only see my mom inside, but Rick was there too. With our history of not getting along, I felt extremely angry and embarrassed he was involved in my nightmare in any way. It bothered me that even with his shortcomings, he was a better parent than my own dad. I don't remember saying a word the whole 30-minute ride to Seattle. I was seething in the back seat. Mom and Rick laughed carelessly in the front while I anticipated how this all was going to play out once we arrived. Will my dad testify? Is my stepdad going to hear everything my real dad did to me? How long will this take? Am I going to die when I see my dad in handcuffs? I could hardly bear the stress of this upcoming event. We finally pulled up to a massive court building in busy downtown Seattle. I stared up at the long tunnel suspended from the jail to the courthouse. On the day I had gone with the detective to meet the prosecutor, he pointed out the hall used to transport prisoners from their cells to their court hearings. Thinking about my dad as a prisoner walking through the hanging tunnel really haunted me. My mom stopped the van in front of the courthouse, and I felt incredibly small compared to this massive structure. This moment, this problem, this feeling was so much bigger than me. Mom looked back at me from the front seat. "This is the place," she told me. "Aren't you coming with me?" I asked. "No, we are going to Nordstrom. We'll come back to pick you up later." I was shocked, hurt, and angry. Who is this woman? What happened to my parents? How much more can I take? I got out of the van and straightened the long dress I had often worn to the Kingdom Hall. It was green with white flowers. I took a deep breath as I opened one of the large, heavy front doors to the tall courthouse building. Immediately, I had to go through security and be scanned with a handheld metal detector. I knew I needed floor 23, and from there, I could find the courtroom. There were people everywhere. I felt I was in a bad dream where people were yelling at me to move out of the way and asking me what floor I needed in the elevator. Well, I just stared blankly, completely lost. I found my way into the courtroom, and to my surprise, I did not see my dad. I didn't recognize anyone there. At some point, the prosecutor approached me and let me know the jail personnel had not transported my dad to the holding cell in time, so the court hearing would have to be rescheduled. I was actually relieved. I made my way downstairs, pushed past the heavy front doors, and waited behind the glass partition of a bus stop. I stood and waited as homeless people stopped to ask me for money. Business people asked if I was okay. Lesbians made comments about my body, and men whistled at me. This was too much. I could not handle any more. I was so angry, I began to cry. My mom is shopping at Nordstrom's thinking I'm in the court hearing, but instead I'm outside in the cold with a bunch of crazy people. I'm too young to be left alone in dirty downtown Seattle. Over an hour later, Mom pulled up to get me. It was a long, quiet ride back to her house. I was so angry, but I didn't want to talk about what happened in front of Rick. When we got home, I lost it. I yelled at my mom for being selfish and insensitive for bringing my stepdad when she knew I didn't like him. I told her how selfish she was for going shopping while I needed her with me. What about me? I feel like I have no support, I said with incredible frustration. Well, I need someone there for me, and my husband is there for me. Again, I yelled, "What about me?" Mom assured me she would go with me to the next court date. She promised not to invite Rick. I felt better, but I was still angry that I had to ask her to be there for me. Why isn't that something she knows how to do on her own? I'm pretty sure at 17 years old, I knew more about being a good parent than either of my parents put together. I was tired of the adults in my life. The next court date came, and Mom picked me up from school. She kept her word, and just the two of us made the trip to Seattle. We parked, went through security, and rode the elevator up to the 23rd floor. I felt ready this time. I was excited for my day of justice. Dad deserved to go to prison for all he had done. I still wanted him to do counseling, but I was glad he was being held accountable for all he had put me through. The courtroom entrance was located at the end of a long hallway on the left. Sitting on a bench across from the courtroom doors was a young woman. She looked even younger than my mom and was dressed nicely, like she was ready for business. When Mom and I got closer, the woman stood up and introduced herself as my court-appointed advocate. Mom motioned for me to shake her hand. Her name was Laura, or was it Karen? It could have been anything. She was a stranger, and I didn't understand why she was there. "I have tissues should you need any," the woman told me. Suddenly, I was not ready. What is happening? I felt like I was being wheeled into surgery, and everyone was prepared except for me. Mom sat down on the bench where the court-appointed advocate had been. The lady opened the door to the courtroom and led us to our seats. Mom took the easy way out again? I was angry she got to sit outside while I faced this mess alone. I peered around the room and began noticing faces of my family. My dad's sister was there, along with other aunts, uncles, and cousins of mine. I was happy to see them. What a relief. I have someone I know here to support me, I thought. They refused to look at me. After each and every one of my family members ignored me, I realized they were there in support of my dad. The courtroom doors opened and in walked my dad wearing an awful, bright orange jumpsuit and ugly brown sandals. I lost my breath. 2 officers led him to his seat at the front of the courtroom. I noticed his wrists were white, squeezed tightly by the handcuffs. I lost it. My eyes welled with tears. And I couldn't stop them from streaming down my face. They need to loosen those cuffs. They're hurting him. I wanted to yell for someone to help him. My court-appointed advocate quickly rushed a tissue into my hand. I don't remember much of what was said, but I do remember the judge presenting a stack of letters written by various Jehovah's Witnesses on behalf of my father in an effort to reduce his prison sentence. Witnesses believe protecting the Jehovah's Witness organization is more important than exposing a criminal, as this would tarnish their good name. I was always taught never to expose wrongdoing to anyone outside of the religion. We were never to say anything bad about other witnesses in order to avoid turning non-witnesses or worldly people off from the religion. If I said something bad about a Jehovah's Witness, even if it were true, I would be blood guilty for the people I turned away from Jehovah. Clearly, this was a real threat. In my 7-year nightmare, I had told at least 12 grown men that my dad was sexually abusing me, and none of them, not one, called the police. Thank God for my worldly mother. Dad was sentenced to 3 months in prison and ordered to complete some therapy while locked up. I was sad he had to go to jail. I felt bad for him. I didn't want people to be mean to him or hurt him. I seemed to have a heart for my dad and his well-being that he didn't have for me. Naive and optimistic, I was still hoping that time away, in addition to counseling, would fix him and I would get my old dad back. I still didn't realize that the amazing dad from my early childhood had died when I was 9 years old, and I would never have the father I once knew back in my life again. Chapter 12, Dangerous Rage. Mom and I drove back to Bellevue. I'm so angry inside, I told her. She suggested I talk to a counselor, and I agreed. At the counselor's office, I met a woman with a thick German accent. I could barely understand her, and she kept asking me to repeat things. Now, was that your stepdad or your dad? Wait, how many brothers do you have? She was more focused on filling out the family tree than helping me navigate how I felt. I didn't feel like she cared or even understood why I was there. When I left my counseling appointment, my entire household was sitting in the weight room as if this were just another item on the day's to-do list. There was no sense of compassion or privacy for my situation. I went one more time and I got the same feeling that this lady was not understanding me on any level. I figured counseling just wasn't for me. After that appointment, I told my mom that I didn't like talking to my counselor, and she seemed fine with me giving up on it. My anger and rage continued to roar inside of me. It was worse than before my dad went to jail. I had hate in my heart for everyone, not just my dad. I thought of my cousin who had swapped molestation stories with me on our camping trip to Montana back when we were 11. She had been sexually abused by a neighbor's father during a childhood sleepover. The man was an elder in her congregation. Years later, my dad went down in a blaze of shame, but my cousin still didn't have justice for her abuse. I can't explain why, but all the rage building within me turned into a plan to kill the elder and avenge the abuse of my cousin. In some sick, twisted plan to get justice for her, I drove an hour away to his house in Marysville, Washington, with the intention to run him over. By the grace of God, he was not home and no one got hurt, but that anger inside me didn't disappear. It drove me to all sorts of unhealthy behaviors. I started fights, yelled at people, and had no grace for anyone. If I was mad, you knew it. I often lost my temper and said rude things to anyone who ticked me off. I was a dangerous mess to myself and anyone around me. Chapter 13, Endless Tears. Almost 2 years after I started dating my first boyfriend, we were still in a serious relationship. By my senior year of high school, I was pregnant. For months, we kept it hidden from everyone, but we were excited to raise this baby together. We were talking in his car one night when I suddenly started cramping, then bleeding a lot. My pain was excruciating and everything was covered in red. My boyfriend got out of the car, ran over to me, picked me up, and laid me in the back seat. He grabbed towels and baseball clothes he found in his trunk to soak up the blood. We were both so afraid. I was still living with my grandparents at the time, so we waited until I knew Ellen would be in bed before I came home. I got in the shower and bled and bled. Finally, I passed a small mass of tissue which got caught in the drain and never went down. I saw it every morning when I showered, but I never had the heart to push it down. Over the following weeks, my boyfriend cried a lot. He was completely devastated that we'd lost our child. I didn't know how I felt. I was lost. If he was happy, I was happy. When he was sad, I was also upset until I could fix it. We often talked about the baby. He couldn't seem to get past the heartbreak he felt. His dad had died when he was really young, and I think the loss triggered all the hurt and pain he'd never worked through. In an effort to make him happy, I suggested we try to get pregnant again. I believed if we started our own family, it would fix all the hurt he and I both felt from our own families. I could not have been more wrong. We got pregnant again, and this time I was so sick I knew that I'd either have to drop out of school and tell everyone what I'd done or find another way to finish high school. I chose the latter and enrolled in an off-campus high school, which only required I attend classes 1 or 2 days a week. I'd stay for a short lesson and then take the bulk of my work home. This structure allowed me to complete my courses in half the time of what it would have taken at my regular high school, and I was on track to graduate a semester early. By attending this accelerated school where every unit was a credit or no credit, I wouldn't be able to apply to any universities, but I was okay with that. Growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, college had never been on the table. They viewed any education past high school as unnecessary and a distraction from meetings. Jehovah's Witnesses later changed their views to support 2-year vocational training at a community college. I guess they figured out it was almost impossible to get a job without some college training. When my belly grew bigger and it was more difficult to hide the fact that I was pregnant, I realized I had made a crazy decision. I wasn't ready to be a mom. I didn't have any way to support this child. I could barely figure out my own self. Now I was bringing another person into this world just to make someone else happy. What was I thinking? In desperation, I called to make an appointment at a Bellevue Social Services office. A kind woman met with me shortly after and asked, "If I help you, will you promise never to do this again?" "I will never do this again," I promised. On the day of my appointment, I skipped class and my boyfriend drove me to a clinic 30 minutes away. Although he really wanted a baby, he also cared deeply about me and my well-being. He supported my decision and was ready to take care of me. From beyond the waiting room, a nurse called out, "Amanda!" I followed her, walking and talking as if this were normal, but I was dead inside. To stay alive, I couldn't allow myself to feel anything. I laid on the table and heard water pouring out of me. I deserve to be killed for this. That was the overwhelming thought consuming every part of me. I just terminated the life of my innocent, perfect, unborn child. Soon after my abortion, I sat in health class learning about the fingers and toes of babies in the womb. And I was overcome by unbearable guilt. I couldn't handle the shame. I decided to get serious about my religion as a Jehovah's Witness. This was my fresh start. I was going to be a good witness and finally be a good person. My boyfriend wasn't in the same religion, and sex before marriage wasn't allowed. He had to go so I could move forward. He had been nothing but kind and loving, and he'd always been there for me. But being around him reminded me of what I'd done. My family was horribly upset when I broke up with him. Mom yelled, "He's like a good piece of furniture. You don't just get rid of a piece of furniture." My devout Jehovah's Witness grandparents even begged for me to take him back, but I was moving on. I stuffed my decision to get an abortion down deep so I would never have to face the pain. This part of my life has always been the most difficult for me to face. It's one thing to talk about what others put me through, but admitting the things I've done wrong is much harder. I wish all the regret, tears, shame, and sadness I felt over the years could undo what I did, but my choice was permanent. Chapter 14, Emotional Prison. A few months later, I graduated from high school and started working full-time in a dental office while also taking classes at Bellevue Community College at night. Mom and Rick owned a condo in Redmond and they let me rent it from them. Even though I was super busy, in my quiet moments, I was haunted by my past. While my dad was in prison, I had a reoccurring nightmare almost every night. I'd be walking out of the grocery store toward my car and he would appear suddenly, coming towards me with a knife. I'd hurry into my car and he would jump on the hood of my car, stabbing at me through the windshield. I was terrified. The dream became so real to me that I couldn't walk to my car without checking the surrounding area to see if my dad was there. I always believed he was hiding somewhere, planning to get me. As his release date came and went, I found myself petrified. As I was walking out to my car to go to work one morning, I saw a note tucked under my windshield wiper. My stomach was instantly in knots. This is it. My dad's going to kill me. I opened the folded paper and read a plea for my old boyfriend who wanted to get back together. What a relief. I realized I couldn't continue living like this, paranoid at 19 years old. I contacted the counselor who had been assigned to me and my dad through the judicial system and court ordered my dad to counseling. Because my dad had been released from prison with a restraining order, it was a lengthy legal process before we could be in the same room together for counseling. During the first appointment, I spoke with the counselor alone. I shared my entire nightmare with her and let her know how angry I was. I also told her how my fear of my dad had made me paranoid and I needed to tell him how much I hated him. The counselor recommended a few books for me to read, then scheduled an appointment for her to serve as the mediator in a meeting with my dad. She explained that this would not be a free-for-all session. He would be required to read from the letter he wrote in preparation for our session. I, however, could express anything I wanted. She recommended I put my thoughts in writing to make sure I remembered everything I wanted to say. Don't worry, the counselor assured me. You won't run into your dad in the parking lot. His appointment will be 30 minutes after yours. She went on to explain that on the day of the appointment, she and I would chat first, then she would get my dad from another room, knock when they returned, and ask my permission for them to enter. If I still wanted to proceed, I could say, "Come in." If I changed my mind, I could say nothing or simply no, and they would not come in. As this woman explained to me how careful she would be to protect me and my wishes, I felt uncomfortable. It seemed like overkill to me. No one, not even my own mother and father, had ever treated me with such tenderness. I was used to the horrible, the miserable, the shocking, and the dreadful. This delicate care of my emotions was too much for me. I didn't know how to react. I sat there politely and listened, nodding my head to hurry her along. The big day was here. I was finally going to talk to my dad. I was going to confront him and tell him off. Accepting the counselor's advice, I had written a letter so I could simply read it without looking at my dad while I spoke. I got approval from work to take a long lunch for a doctor's appointment. I would have rather died than tell my boss I was going to confront my dad for sexually abusing me. I left work and headed to the counselor's office just a few miles away. When I arrived, the counselor promptly brought me back to her private room. We talked about my feelings and my letter. She gave me permission to get anything I wanted off my chest and encouraged me not to hold back. Even cursing was okay. This was my session, my moment, my chance to heal. I felt powerful and ready to face my dad. She left the room to go get him and reminded me, you're in control of whether or not we come in. And if you change your mind, that's completely okay. I nodded. There was no way I was going to say no. I had anxiously waited for this moment. I needed it to be over so I could eat, sleep, and end my paranoia. The counselor knocked on the door. This was it. My voice cracked as I said, come in. I was more nervous than I wanted to admit. She knocked again. I said it louder. They entered the room and she sat on my right side while my dad took a seat on the left of me. It had been almost 2 years since I'd last seen him. The counselor immediately took control of the conversation and asked him to read the letter he had prepared. I sat there and listened. In his first sentence, he stated the beginning and the ending dates of his abuse against me and told me that over the course of those years, he had molested and raped me over 1,200 times. I was shocked. I didn't know what to think. I had no idea it happened that much. It got worse. He admitted he used to stalk me and follow me to my friends' houses or wherever we were hanging out. He told me he would watch me from outside the window while I was in the shower at his house. Then he admitted that when I had an allergy attack at 16 years old, he would give me the date rape drug instead of Benadryl so he could have his way with me and I couldn't fight him. That was it. I wanted to kill him. He could have killed me. I was not prepared to hear any of this. I thought I already knew everything that had happened. I had been completely and utterly violated in every way possible, and I didn't even know it. His letters seemed to go on forever, and I was ready for it to be over. Now it was my turn. I didn't feel powerful anymore. This man who was supposed to love and protect me had hurt me once again. After hearing his letter, I made a decision. He was not welcome in my life ever. I knew I couldn't trust him. If he was willing to give me illegal drugs to feed his selfish desires, what else will he do to me if he can't control himself in the future? I was done with him. My heart was broken. I'd hoped that somehow this counseling would help us get past it all and eventually he'd be close again. I didn't think I had anything left, but another part of me died that day. Who am I? How am I going to live my whole life without my dad? I read my letter. I shared my frustration and anger at him for taking my innocence away and leaving me to feel awkward and weird, even to that very day. I was constantly questioning my behavior, clothes, and facial expressions because I desperately wanted to fit in without anyone knowing my secret. I didn't know how to act or what was normal. I had to copy a little bit of personality from everyone I knew to try to create my own identity. I told him I hated him. I told him that because of what he did to me, I had to lie to protect myself from humiliation. And now I didn't know what was true and what was a lie. I think I even took the liberty to cuss at him. But as I came to the end of my letter, I wasn't feeling any better. After all my preparation, I didn't understand why. I finished reading and looked up. The counselor asked if I had any questions for my dad. I didn't. She asked me if I had anything else I wanted to say. I don't hate you. I love you. But I hate what you did to me. I told him I forgave him and wished him well, but that I didn't want him in my life because I couldn't trust him. With that, the session ended and she escorted my dad out of the room. I went back to work and felt as if I was living in an alternate reality. I had just lost my father during my lunch hour, and here I was going about my work as if I had just gotten a mole removed or had some other simple procedure.